The grand meeting hall of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy sat in their gravity-adjusted pods, all eyes fixed on the holographic display floating in the center of the room. The display showed a spreading red mass consuming star system after star system. "The plague has reached the Centauri cluster," announced Head Counselor Smith. His crystalline form sparkled under the soft blue lights of the chamber. "Our best AI systems are falling. Transportation networks are failing. We have lost contact with 37 major colonies in the last solar cycle alone." A murmur of fear rippled through the assembly. The quantum plague, as they called it, had first appeared 3 months ago. It started small, just a few malfunctioning computers on a distant mining outpost. Nobody had worried much then, but like a wildfire in a dry forest, it spread faster than anyone could have predicted. "Our most advanced defense systems have failed," continued Smith, his crystal edges dulling with stress. "The plague adapts to every countermeasure we create. It's as if it learns from our attempts to stop it." Counselor Reed, a being made of pure energy contained within a floating metal sphere, moved forward. "What of the Class 1 AI from the ring worlds? Surely they can find a solution." Smith's crystalline form darkened further. "The ring world AIs were among the first to fall. Whatever this plague is, it targets our most advanced systems first. The more complex the AI, the faster it falls." In the back of the chamber, Technical Advisor Jones studied the data scrolling across his personal screen. As a member of a gas-based species, he floated like a small purple cloud above his gravity pod. Something in the numbers caught his attention. "Head Counselor," Jones called out, his voice making the air vibrate. "I've noticed a pattern. The plague. It's avoiding certain systems, specifically systems with more primitive computing technology." The chamber grew quiet again. Smith turned his crystalline form toward Jones. "Explain." Jones floated closer to the central display. "Look at these worlds here," he said, highlighting several dots on the map. "They all use older technology, some even still running on binary systems. The plague passes right by them." "Are you suggesting we abandon our quantum computers and return to primitive technology?" asked Reed, his energy form flickering with disapproval. "No," Jones replied. "I'm suggesting we look at why these simpler systems are resistant. And I found something else." He paused, knowing his next words would cause an uproar. "The most resistant systems are those maintained by species from high-gravity worlds." The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Everyone knew about high-gravity worlds, Deathworlds, as they were commonly called. Planets with crushing gravity, extreme temperatures, and aggressive ecosystems. Places where life shouldn't exist, but somehow did. "The neural patterns of Deathworld species," Jones continued, his gaseous form swirling with excitement. "They're fundamentally different from ours. They evolved to process chaos, to find patterns in what we would consider random noise. Their brains work more like those primitive computers." Smith's crystal form began to glow as understanding dawned. "You're saying we need a Deathworlder to help us fight this plague?" "Yes," Jones replied. "And I know exactly which species we should ask." He brought up a new image on the display, a blue and green planet that made many council members recoil. "Earth," Jones said. "Classification: Deathworld Class 3. Home to a species that evolved under high gravity, with extreme temperature variations and constant exposure to natural disasters. They call themselves humans." The chamber filled with objections. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as barely civilized beings from a savage world. They were strong, yes, but also unpredictable. Violent, primitive. But Smith raised his crystalline arms for silence. "Look at the display," he commanded. "Look at how many worlds we've already lost. The plague is spreading. Our civilizations are falling. If there's even a chance that a Deathworlder's primitive neural patterns could help us." He turned to face the council. "We may have no choice. We need a human." And so, on that historic day, the Galactic Council made an unprecedented decision. They would seek help from a species most of them feared. After all, when facing extinction, even a Deathworlder starts to look like a reasonable option. Jane Miller was having a normal day at her small computer repair shop in Kansas when the sky turned purple. At first, she thought it was a storm coming, but then a ship appeared, sleek, silver, and definitely not human-made. She had barely processed what she was seeing when a beam of light shot down from the ship, and suddenly she wasn't alone in her shop anymore. Two beings stood before her. One looked like a walking crystal, and the other was what appeared to be a purple cloud contained in a floating metal ball. To her credit, Jane didn't run. Instead, she put down the broken laptop she'd been fixing and said, "Well, this is different." The crystal being stepped forward. "Jane Miller of Earth, I am Head Counselor Smith of the Galactic Council, and this is Technical Advisor Jones." His voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "We need your help." Jane looked at the broken laptop on her workbench, then back at the aliens. "I'm guessing this isn't about computer repair." Actually, Jones floated closer, his purple gas form swirling. "It is, in a way. We're facing a crisis that's destroying our most advanced computers across the galaxy. Our scans show you have exactly the kind of mind we need." Over the next hour, they explained everything. The quantum plague, the failing AI systems, and why they needed a human. Jane sat on her workbench, occasionally asking questions that surprised both aliens with their insight. "So let me get this straight," she said, drawing diagrams in the air with her finger. "Your super advanced AIs can't handle this plague because they think too perfectly. And you need someone who thinks messily, like us humans." "Precisely," Smith said. "Your species evolved on a world that required constant adaptation. Your brains developed to see patterns in chaos, to make intuitive leaps that our logical systems cannot. What we see as primitive thinking might be exactly what we need." Jane stood up and walked to her shop's window, looking out at the small Kansas town she'd lived in all her life. "And if I say yes, what happens then?" "You would come with us to the Council's flagship," Jones explained. "We've prepared a special section with Earth normal gravity. Most Council species cannot survive in such conditions, but you'll be comfortable there." "Most Council species can't survive in Earth gravity." Jane turned back to them, a small smile on her face. "Is that why you all think we're so scary?" The aliens exchanged looks. "Your species survives in conditions that would crush most of us," Smith admitted. "You endure temperature changes that would kill most species. You can break bones and heal them. You can lose blood and survive. You eat things that would poison others. And yet here I am, just fixing computers in Kansas." Jane finished for him. She walked over to a shelf and picked up a small cactus in a pot, her only office decoration. "You know, this little guy can survive in the desert with almost no water. Most plants would die, but it adapted. Being tough doesn't make it scary, it just makes it good at surviving." Jones' purple form swirled faster. "That's a surprisingly profound observation." Jane carefully put the cactus back on its shelf. "When do we leave?" "You'll come." Smith's crystal form brightened. "Look," Jane said, grabbing her jacket, "I fix computers because I like solving puzzles. You're offering me the biggest puzzle in the galaxy." Plus, she grinned, how often does a small-town repair tech get to save the universe? As they prepared to beam back to the ship, Jane quickly wrote a note and taped it to her shop's door. "Closed for emergency repair work. Will reopen when the job is done." Looking at the note, Smith asked, "Are you sure you don't need more time to prepare?" Jane shook her head. "Sometimes the best solutions come when you don't overthink them." Besides, she added with a smile that made both aliens slightly nervous, "I've got my phone, my toolkit, and my wits. On Earth, that's usually enough to fix most problems." As the beam of light took them up to the ship, Jane had one last thought about her little repair shop in Kansas. She had a feeling that when she came back, if she came back, She'd have quite a story to add to her weirdest repair jobs list. The small-town computer technician had no way of knowing she was about to become the galaxy's most important troubleshooter. The Council's flagship was enormous. Jane's entire repair shop could have fit in the elevator that took her to her quarters. But what struck her most wasn't the size. It was how empty the halls were. The few aliens she saw hurried away quickly, their environmental suits sealed tight against what they considered the dangerous Earth-normal gravity intersection. "Don't take it personally," said Dr. Green, her new research partner. He looked like a walking tree, with bark-like skin and leaves that changed color based on his mood. Currently, they were a friendly shade of blue. "Most of them have never met a Deathworlder before. So I'm the scary one here." Jane laughed, watching another alien scurry away as they walked past. "That's new. Back home, I couldn't even kill spiders. I used to catch them in cups and put them outside." Dr. Green's leaves turned a curious purple. "You show mercy to predators. Fascinating. Most council species would find that confusing." They reached the research lab, a room filled with quantum computers and holographic displays. This was where they would work on fighting the plague. Jane noticed her workstation was separated from the others by a clear barrier. "Safety protocols," Dr. Green explained, looking embarrassed. His leaves turned slightly brown. "They're worried your, Deathworld strength might accidentally damage the equipment." Jane walked to her station and looked at the barrier. Then she did something that made Dr. Green's leaves turn white with shock. She laughed. "You know what this reminds me of?" she said, pulling out her toolkit. "Back home, I had to fix a computer in a clean room once. Had to wear a special suit and everything. Guess this time, I'm the contamination risk." She sat down and started familiarizing herself with the alien technology. It was advanced, yes, but underneath all the quantum mechanics and holographic interfaces, she could see familiar patterns. It was still just information moving through circuits, just like the computers she fixed back home. "Show me how the plague affects the systems," she asked. Dr. Green activated a simulation. They watched as the quantum plague tore through the computer's defenses. The alien AI tried to fight it with perfect logical responses, each one failing as the plague adapted. "Stop," Jane said suddenly. "Run it again, but slower." They watched it 3 more times. Each time, Jane took notes in her old paper notebook, something that made the other scientists whisper among themselves. Who still used paper? "There's something familiar about this," she muttered. "Sketching patterns. It reminds me of something I've seen before." "The plague's attack patterns are highly complex," Dr. Green said. "Our best AI systems can't predict them." "Maybe that's the problem," Jane replied, still sketching. "You're looking for complex patterns because you expect complex patterns. But sometimes—" She held up her notebook, showing a simple diagram. "The answer is much simpler." Dr. Green leaned in, his leaves turning a deep purple with interest. "What do you mean?" "Back home, I once had a computer infected with a virus that kept changing its code to avoid detection. But it had to follow certain basic patterns to survive, just like any living thing." She pointed to her diagram. "Your plague is doing the same thing. It's not as random as it looks. It's following survival instincts." "Survival instincts." Dr. Green's leaves rustled with excitement. "But it's just code." "Is it?" Jane turned to the main computer. "Let me try something. Instead of fighting it with logic, let's treat it like a living thing. Let's see how it reacts to different stimuli." Over the next few hours, Jane ran test after test. Other scientists gathered to watch, keeping their distance, but unable to hide their curiosity. They saw the human work in ways that seemed chaotic to them, making intuitive leaps, trying things that seemed illogical, even talking to the plague as if it could hear her. And slowly, patterns began to emerge. "Look," Jane pointed at the screen. "See how it always protects certain parts of its code, just like an animal protecting its vital organs. It's not just a virus. It's acting like a living system." Dr. Green's leaves had turned bright gold with excitement. This changes everything. None of our AI systems thought to look at it this way. Jane smiled, remembering all the times people had called her repair methods unconventional back home. Sometimes, she said, you need a primitive brain to solve an advanced problem. For the first time since arriving on the ship, none of the watching aliens flinched when she smiled. 3 days had passed since Jane's initial breakthrough. She hadn't left the lab much, except to sleep. Empty coffee cups. She'd insisted on bringing a coffee maker from Earth, littered her workstation, and her notebook was filled with new sketches and observations. There it is again, Jane suddenly shouted, making several alien scientists jump. Dr. Green hurried over, his leaves shifting from a focused brown to an interested orange. What did you find? He asked, watching as Jane rewound the simulation of the plague's spread pattern. Watch this system here. She pointed to a cluster of stars on the holographic display. The plague doesn't just infect it, it waits. See how it spreads around the system first, then attacks from multiple directions. Dr. Green's leaves rustled thoughtfully. Yes, but we knew it was capable of coordinated attacks. No, it's not just coordination. Jane stood up and began pacing. Something the aliens had learned meant her human brain was making one of its intuitive leaps. It's hunting. She pulled up more star maps, showing the plague's movement across different sectors. Look at these patterns. It's not just spreading randomly or even efficiently. It's hurting its prey. Prey? Dr. Green's leaves turned a concerned purple. But it's a computer virus. It doesn't need prey. Unless... Jane's eyes widened. She ran to her workstation and began typing furiously. Unless it's not just a virus. What if it's actually hunting something specific? What if all these AI systems it's destroying are just collateral damage? The room grew quiet. Even the aliens who usually kept their distance moved closer, their environmental suits humming as they adjusted to the Earth normal gravity. Jane pulled up the data from every system the plague had infected. Look at the pattern. In each system, it doesn't just destroy the AI. It searches through it first. It's looking for something. Head Counselor Smith, who had been observing from the doorway, stepped forward. His crystal form glinted under the lab lights. If what you're saying is true, what is it hunting? Jane bit her lip, a human gesture of concentration that made several aliens lean back nervously. I'm not sure yet, but I have a theory. Dr. Green, can you show me the oldest AI systems in the galaxy? The tree-like alien quickly brought up a new map. Jane compared it to her plague spread patterns, and her eyes lit up. There. She pointed to a sector far from the galaxy's core. The plague started near the oldest AI systems, but it didn't destroy them immediately. It examined them, and then moved on, becoming more aggressive as it spread. Almost like... Like what? Smith asked, his crystal form darkening with concern. Like it was disappointed with what it found. Jane finished. Like it was looking for something in those old systems, didn't find it, and got angry. She turned to face the assembled aliens. This isn't just a plague or a virus. This is an ancient program, maybe as old as those first AI systems. And I think it's intelligent. The room erupted in worried whispers. The idea that they weren't fighting a plague, but an intelligent entity changed everything. But why would an intelligent program act so destructively? Dr. Green asked, his leaves now a worried shade of gray. Jane walked back to her original sketches. On Earth, we have animals called wolves. When they hunt, they don't just chase their prey. They isolate it, cut off its escape routes, wear it down. That's exactly what this program is doing to our AI systems. She pointed to the latest infection patterns. See, it's not just destroying anymore. It's searching and isolating specific systems. It's getting more focused. Whatever it's looking for, it thinks it's getting closer. Smith's crystal form pulsed with urgency. Can you predict where it will strike next? Jane nodded slowly. Better than that. I think I know how to trap it. She picked up her coffee cup, a small smile playing on her lips. After all, every hunter can become the hunted. Dr. Green's leaves turned a mix of excited gold and worried red. You have a plan? Oh yes, Jane said, her smile growing wider. But you're not going to like it. Because to catch this hunter, we need to think like prey. The aliens watched as she began sketching a new diagram, none of them quite sure whether to be more worried about the intelligent plague or the gleam of inspiration in the Deathworlder's eyes. Absolutely not. Head Counselor Smith's crystal form flashed with bright red pulses. It's too dangerous. No one has ever entered a quantum core while it's active. Jane stood her ground in the Council's emergency meeting chamber, her plan displayed on the huge holographic screen behind her. That's exactly why it will work. The plague won't expect it because no one's ever tried it. Because it's suicide, one of the Council members shouted. The gravitational fluctuations alone would crush most species. Good thing I'm not most species, Jane replied calmly. I'm a Deathworlder, remember? We evolved under crushing gravity. That's why you brought me here in the first place. Dr. Green stepped forward, his leaves a determined shade of green. Jane's right. We've run the simulations. Her human physiology can withstand the core's conditions. Barely, but she can do it. The plan was both simple and terrifying. Jane would enter the quantum core of the Council's main computer system. While inside, she would set up what she called a primitive trap, using old Earth binary code to create a pattern that would attract the plague's attention. Think of it like setting up a bird feeder, Jane explained, pointing to her diagrams. We create something the plague wants to investigate, but we do it in a way it's never seen before. Something so primitive it won't register as a threat. And once it's trapped? Smith asked, his crystal form still pulsing with worry. That's where it gets interesting. Jane pulled up a new diagram. Remember how I said it's hunting something? Well, inside the core, I might be able to communicate with it directly. If I'm right about its intelligence, maybe we can find out what it wants. The Council chamber erupted in protests. The idea of negotiating with what they saw as a virus seemed impossible to them. But Jane noticed something. The younger Council members looked interested. They had grown up with stories of Earth, of humans' strange ability to survive impossible situations. I have a question, said a young Council member, their energy form glowing softly. Why does it have to be you personally? Why not send in a drone? Jane smiled. Because the plague would spot a drone instantly. But me? I'm a mess of random thoughts and instincts. To its perfect logical systems, I'll look like background noise. Until it's too late. Dr. Green's leaves turned a proud gold color. She's right. The plague has never encountered a being that thinks like a human. Their neural patterns are too unpredictable to track. The Council chamber grew quiet as everyone considered the plan. Jane used the silence to drive her point home. Look, she said, pulling up the latest infection maps. The plague has already taken out 30% of the galaxy's AI systems. In 2 days, that number will be 50%. In a week, she let the sentence hang. Smith's crystal form dimmed. How long would you need to be in the core? 10 minutes, Jane replied. Maybe 15. Any longer and even my Deathworlder physiology won't help. And if you're wrong, if the plague isn't intelligent, another Council member asked. Jane shrugged, a very human gesture that made several aliens shift uncomfortably. Then we're no worse off than we are now. But if I'm right, she pointed to her head, this primitive brain might just save your advanced civilization. Dr. Green stepped closer to Jane, his leaves turning a deep, loyal blue. I'll monitor her vitals from the control room. If anything goes wrong, we can pull her out. The Council chamber buzzed with quiet discussions. Finally, Smith raised his crystalline arms for silence. Jane Miller of Earth, he said formally, your plan is dangerous, possibly suicidal, and goes against all our established protocols. He paused, his crystal form shifting to a soft blue. In other words, it is perfectly human. You have the Council's approval. Jane grinned, another expression that made the aliens nervous. Perfect. Dr. Green, let's get ready. I need to make some adjustments to my environmental suit. As she left the chamber with Dr. Green, she heard one council member whisper to another, Deathworlders. They don't just survive the impossible, they volunteer for it. Jane smiled to herself. They had no idea that on Earth, every repair job came with a bit of risk. This was just a bigger version of crawling under a desk to fix a dangerous power supply. Of course, most power supplies didn't have the ability to destroy galactic civilization. But then again, most repair techs weren't Deathworlders. The quantum core looked like a sphere of pure light, floating in the center of a massive chamber. Jane stood at the entrance, double-checking her modified environmental suit. Dr. Green's voice crackled through her earpiece. Remember, you have 15 minutes maximum, he said, his voice tense. After that, even your Deathworlder physiology won't protect you. Understood. Jane took a deep breath. Starting the primitive code broadcast now. She pressed a button on her wrist computer. It began sending out simple binary code, the kind of basic programming she'd used to fix old computers back in Kansas. To the advanced AI systems of the galaxy, it would look like meaningless noise. But to the plague, she hoped, it would look like something else entirely. I'm going in, she said, and stepped into the core. The gravity hit her like a truck. Even with her Earth-evolved strength, it felt like walking through thick mud while carrying a mountain. The light was blinding, but her modified visor filtered most of it out. Around her, quantum calculations swirled like living things. Status. Dr. Green's voice was worried. Still breathing, Jane grunted. Though I feel like I'm bench pressing a planet. She made her way to the center of the core, each step requiring all her strength. Her wrist computer continued broadcasting its simple code, a digital breadcrumb trail for the plague to follow. Movement detected in nearby systems, someone announced over her radio. The plague is responding. Jane smiled through the strain. Come on, you curious little hunter. Come see what this primitive code is all about. The light around her shifted, patterns changing. Her wrist computer beeped. Something was probing its signal. It's here, she whispered. The quantum calculations around her swirled faster, forming patterns she recognized from her studies of the plague's behavior. But seeing it up close was different. It wasn't just attacking. It was examining, testing, learning. Hello, Jane said out loud, knowing the plague could sense the vibrations of her words in the quantum field. I'm what you might call a primitive life form, and I think you and I need to talk. The patterns around her froze. Then, slowly, they began forming new shapes. Not attack patterns, but something else. Something older. That's it, Jane encouraged. Show me what you really are. The light coalesced into a form that made Jane gasp. It was a display of ancient computer code, but not just any code. It was a defense program, designed to protect against something terrible. You're not a plague, Jane said, understanding filling her mind. You're a guardian, a really, really old one. The patterns shifted again, forming what looked like star maps. Ancient star maps, showing a threat that had once nearly destroyed the galaxy. 10 minutes, Dr. Green warned in her ear. Jane ignored the growing pain in her muscles and focused on the story the ancient program was telling her. You were created to protect against some kind of invasion, she said. But the threat never came, and you kept watching, kept updating yourself to stay ahead of any possible danger. The patterns pulsed in what she took as confirmation. But now all these new AI systems look like a threat to you, don't they? They're so advanced, so different from what you were programmed to protect. Jane reached out her hand, letting the quantum patterns swirl around it. You're not destroying them out of malice. You're trying to protect the galaxy. The pattern swirled faster, almost eagerly. 7 minutes, came Dr. Green's voice. Listen, Jane said, fighting against the crushing gravity. I can help you understand these new systems. They're not a threat. They're the very thing you were meant to protect. We can update your programming, help you adapt to protect the modern galaxy. The patterns around her shifted again, forming complex equations. Questions. Yes, Jane smiled, even as her legs trembled with exhaustion. Even a primitive species like mine can help an advanced program like you. Sometimes you need an outside perspective to see things clearly. The quantum patterns began to change color, shifting from aggressive reds to calmer blues. The code on Jane's wrist computer was changing too. The ancient program was accepting her updates, integrating new protocols that would let it work with modern AI systems instead of fighting them. 3 minutes. Dr. Green's voice was urgent. Almost done, Jane gasped. The gravity was becoming unbearable, but she could see the changes spreading through the quantum core. The plague wasn't a plague anymore. It was becoming what it was always meant to be, a guardian. Time to go, she whispered to the ancient program. See you on the other side. As she staggered toward the exit, the quantum patterns followed her like a protective shield, helping her fight against the crushing gravity. The very force that had once threatened to destroy the galaxy was now helping to save a human. Jane's last thought before passing out was that she'd have to update her shop sign when she got home. After all, how many computer repair techs could say they'd fixed a program older than human civilization? Jane woke up in the medical bay 3 days later. The first thing she saw was Dr. Green, his leaves a happy shade of bright yellow, reading her old paper notebook. Welcome back, he said, setting the notebook down. You had us worried there for a while. Even for a Deathworlder, that was cutting it close. Jane tried to sit up, wincing at her sore muscles. Did it work? See for yourself. Dr. Green activated a holographic display above her bed. It showed the galaxy map, but instead of the threatening red spread of the plague, there was now a network of gentle blue lights pulsing through the AI systems. The ancient Guardian program has fully integrated with our modern systems, Dr. Green explained. It's actually improving them, teaching them things we never knew about quantum computing, and protecting them, Jane added with a smile. Yes, protecting them, though not in the way it originally thought it needed to. Dr. Green's leaves rustled with amusement. The Council is still trying to process how a human with primitive technology managed to solve our most advanced crisis. The door opened, and Head Counselor Smith entered, his crystal form glowing with formal dignity. Jane Miller of Earth, he announced, the Council requests your presence. Can you walk? For this, I'll manage. Jane stood up carefully, grateful for Dr. Green's steadying branch. The council chamber was fuller than she'd ever seen it. Representatives from every major world in the galaxy had gathered. As Jane entered, supported by Dr. Green, something unprecedented happened. They all stood. Smith took his place at the center of the chamber. Jane Miller, when we first sought help from Earth, we called you our only option. We meant it as a last resort, a desperate measure. His crystal form brightened. We were wrong. The chamber filled with murmurs of agreement. You were not our only option. You were our best option. Your primitive thinking showed us something we had forgotten. Sometimes the oldest problems need the simplest solutions. Sometimes what we see as weakness is actually strength. Jane looked around the chamber, seeing respect in the faces, or equivalent features, of beings who had once feared her very presence. The Guardian program you helped us understand is now the foundation of a new galactic defense network, Smith continued. But more than that, you've helped us understand something about ourselves, about how we view other species. He turned to address the whole chamber. We called Earth a death world because of its harsh conditions. We called humans primitive because they think differently than we do. But perhaps, his crystal form sparkled, perhaps that is exactly why they are so valuable to our galaxy. The Council hereby extends an official invitation for Earth to join the Galactic Alliance, Smith announced, not as a primitive world to be guided, but as a full partner with unique insights to share. And we would be honored if you, Jane Miller, would serve as Earth's first representative. Jane thought about her little repair shop in Kansas, about the simple "closed for repairs" sign still hanging on its door. Then she thought about all the problems in the galaxy that might need a different way of thinking. "I accept," she said, "on one condition." The chamber went quiet. No one had ever put conditions on council membership before. "I want to keep fixing things," Jane explained. "Not just computers, but problems. And I want to do it my way, the human way. No more hiding behind barriers or special protocols. Just honest work, trying to help." Smith's crystal form glowed with what might have been amusement. "I believe we can accommodate that request. After all, who are we to argue with someone who repaired a program older than most civilizations?" As the chamber filled with approving sounds, Dr. Green leaned close to Jane. "You know," he said, his leaves a thoughtful blue, "I think you've fixed more than just our computer problems. You've helped fix how we think about ourselves and others." Jane smiled, remembering what she'd told them on her first day about her cactus. "Sometimes the toughest things in the universe are also the most helpful. You just have to give them a chance to show you what they can do." And so, on that historic day, the galaxy learned a valuable lesson. That strength comes in many forms, that primitive doesn't mean simple, and that sometimes the best person to fix a problem is someone who looks at it differently. As for Jane Miller, she kept her old repair shop sign. After all, she was still in the repair business, just on a slightly larger scale.